My foster dad started calling my pregnant foster mom the tenant and throwing away her mail while she watched. When I asked why we never ate dinner together anymore, he looked at her belly and said, "Just easier this way." I stayed silent. That was 9 months ago. This morning, he was crying in court while the judge terminated his parental rights. My foster dad stopped loving his wife the moment she became pregnant, and at first I thought he was just scared, but then I realized something darker. 1 month ago, they were kissing until I'd tell them to get a room. 8 weeks later, her bump was starting to show, and he'd fake phone calls when she tried to cuddle on the couch. The recliner became his permanent spot, and I'd catch him staring at her belly with this expression of pure disgust. At the grocery store, he walked 5 feet ahead like he was ashamed of how she looked, leaving her to carry all the bags. Her shirt rode up once, showing stretch marks, and he audibly yewed. He started insisting she only wear baggy clothes around the house, claiming he couldn't see her looking like that. I'd catch him staring at her old photos, even outwardly asking her where this beautiful woman went. Every night, she'd still reach for him, but he slept on the edge, back turned, too grossed out to touch her. In the morning, she struggled with her shoes, but he stood there watching with that same disgusted look, as if her getting physically weaker was something to hate her for. I asked why we never ate dinner together anymore, but he looked directly at her belly. Just easier this way. He soon started introducing her as the kid's mom, instead of my wife, to anyone he met. His co-workers didn't even know she was pregnant until she visited for lunch. Then came my cousin's birthday party, which he turned into an opportunity to shame her. My aunt rushed over. "You must be so excited about the baby," but he stared at her belly with such hatred that my aunt stepped back. Someone asked about the due date, and he walked away mid-conversation, leaving her to answer alone. He wouldn't say, "We're pregnant." It was always, "She's pregnant." Someone said the baby might have his eyes and his jaw tightened like he was about to punch them. When Uncle Pete congratulated him on becoming a dad, he went silent and just stared at his wife like she was the ugliest woman in the world. I told someone I was excited to be a big brother. Big brother to her baby, he interrupted me. When it came dinner time and she wanted a second plate, he made a comment about her getting big enough. When her mom defended her and made her feel good about her body, he stood up and made a scene of leaving early. That's when he started taking over my bedtime. "Mom needs her rest," he said, taking over my bedtime once a week. Before I knew it, he was tucking me in every night. "Mom's tired from the baby" became his constant excuse, even when she was sitting alone wanting company. I'd try asking her questions, but he'd intercept, "Don't bother Mom." When she couldn't play outside anymore because walking was harder, he'd shake his head. "Mom's different now, isn't she?" He pulled out old photos constantly, pointing at them. "Remember when Mom used to be fun? She forgot my practice once for a doctor's appointment, and he pounced on it. She only thinks about the baby now." Watching her struggle upstairs, gripping the rail, he'd turn to me. "See how slow she is? That's why we don't wait." The comments got darker. "You and me, we were fine before all this." Then, real parents always love their real kids more. At her baby shower, while she opened gifts, he pulled me aside. "After the baby comes, you'll be forgotten. That's what happens with real kids." Mom called me over to help, and he physically held me back. "She doesn't need you anymore. She has her baby." Soon, he stopped using her name entirely, calling her she or it when she was right there. The tenant to our neighbors. Removed her from Netflix, their bank account, phone plan, everything. He started throwing her mail in trash unopened, bills, appointments, cards from her sister. When she dropped her fork at dinner, he kicked it further away. I watched him throw her prenatal vitamins in the garbage while she watched. He hid her car keys when she had a doctor's appointment. I remember she started choking on water once, and he didn't even look up from the TV. I had to give her the Heimlich I'd learned in school. I remember she collapsed at Target, and he pretended not to notice. I had to call security, and we took her to the hospital. He didn't even show up. I remember she started experiencing abdominal pains, and he just turned the TV volume up to drown out her breathing. Then came my 7th birthday. Mom had decorated overnight and made pancakes despite barely sleeping. That's when Dad walked in. "You need to leave." Mom shook her head like she was pleading, but he continued. "Either you leave for the day, or I take him somewhere else. I can't stand being in the same house as you." She started crying. I ran to Mom, grabbed her legs. "I want to go with Mom," but he pulled me back hard. "No, you're staying." I was crying, trying to hold her. She wiped her tears and still knelt down despite her huge belly. She took my hands and hugged me. "Stay and have your party, sweetie. You've been too excited for it not to." He then dragged me back as I tried following her to the door. "Mom!" I screamed while he held me. He shut the door on her, and I pressed against the window watching her waddle to her car alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt guilty about Mom missing my party, so I got her favorite cookies from the pantry, hoping to cheer her up. When I heard the shower running, I snuck in. I opened her nightstand drawer to leave the cookies as a surprise, but inside were papers. Paternity test results. Dated 5 months ago. I remembered that timing, exactly when Dad started becoming extremely hostile towards Mom. I scrolled through those results, and that's when I saw it. Probability of paternity, 0%. I didn't know what that meant, but I could tell it was something important. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely hold the papers straight. The water shut off in the bathroom, and I quickly grabbed Elena's phone from her nightstand and snapped 3 photos of the test results before shoving everything back in the drawer. I ran back to my room and jumped under the covers just as Elena walked past my door. floor. Through the crack under my door, I watched her shadow stop at her dresser, and then I heard this weird gasp. She must have opened that drawer because next thing I heard was her crying real quiet and saying something I couldn't make out. The next morning, Marcus was making his coffee, while Elena threw up in the bathroom for like 10 minutes straight. He just turned the TV louder and kept watching sports highlights. I filled a glass with cold water and grabbed a washcloth from the hall closet and brought them to Elena, who was sitting on the bathroom floor looking super pale. She pulled me into this tight hug, and I felt tears dropping on my head. At breakfast, Marcus dropped this bomb on us about me switching schools. Elena's fork hit her plate hard, and she started to say something, but Marcus cut her off, saying it was already done, and I'd start Monday at some school 40 minutes away. Elena looked like she wanted to scream, but she just stared at her eggs. Later that afternoon, while Elena napped on the couch, I grabbed her phone and started scrolling through her texts. There were all these messages from someone saved as mom from like 2 months ago, begging Elena to come home and saying Marcus wasn't who she thought he was. The newer messages showed Elena asking for help, but then the replies just stopped completely. That weekend, Elena asked me to help fold the baby clothes she'd bought back when things were normal. Her hands shook when she pulled out this tiny pink onesie that said, "Daddy's girl," and she shoved it deep in the drawer like it burned her. She kept whispering stuff I couldn't really hear, except for one part about things not being meant to be. Monday night, Marcus came home with this stack of papers and made Elena sit at the kitchen table to sign them. I watched from behind the wall as she read through them, and her face went white as a sheet. She asked him straight up if this gave him full custody of me, if they separated, and his jaw got all tight, and he just told her to sign it. 3 days later was my first day at the new school, and the lady at the front desk kept saying how weird it was to get a transfer this late in the year from so far away. I memorized every street sign and landmark on that long bus ride, counting turns and watching for anything I could remember. The next week, Elena had her doctor appointment, and I begged to go with her. Marcus actually said yes, which surprised me. Dr. Hoffman took one look at Elena and asked about her weight loss and these bruises on her arms I hadn't noticed before. She sent me to the waiting room, but I could hear her asking Elena questions in this worried voice. Elena kept saying she just bruised easy and everything was fine. A few nights later, I heard Marcus on the phone in the garage, so I grabbed Elena's old tablet from behind the paint cans where I'd been hiding it and hit record. He was saying how Elena had nowhere to go because her family cut her off months ago and how my adoption wasn't final yet, and he needed more time to get everything in place. I put the tablet back and snuck to my room thinking about what he meant by getting things in place. That evening, I was doing my math homework at the kitchen table while Elena sat on the couch knitting a tiny yellow blanket for the baby. Marcus hadn't been home for dinner all week, and Elena kept looking at the door every time a car passed outside. She winced and grabbed her belly, and I ran over with the heating pad from the bathroom closet. She smiled at me while I plugged it in behind the couch and helped her position it against her back. She touched my face and said I was such a good boy and made me promise to always be good. The next morning, while Marcus was in the shower, I was looking for my library book in his office when I saw bank statements sticking out of the trash can. I wonder what Marcus is really trying to hide with those bank statements in the trash. There's something about the timing of finding those papers right after he talked about getting things in place that makes me think this goes deeper than just being a bad husband. I pulled them out and saw all these big withdrawals from their joint account with amounts like $500 and $800 every few days. At the bottom of the trash was Elena's debit card, cut into 4 pieces, and a letter from the bank saying her card was reported lost and a new one would be sent to the primary account holder. I put everything back exactly how I found it and went to school, but I couldn't stop thinking about how Elena had asked Marcus for grocery money yesterday, and he said they were tight on cash. That Sunday, James and Grace came over for dinner, and I helped Elena set the table while Marcus watched football in the living room. Elena was moving so slow, and James kept watching her with this worried look on his face. When we sat down to eat, Elena dropped her fork, trying to reach the salt, and Marcus grabbed it off the floor and put it on the counter. He told her she could eat with her hands since she couldn't handle utensils properly. James stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, but Grace grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. Elena picked up her chicken with her fingers while tears rolled down her face, and nobody said anything for the rest of dinner. A week later, I woke up with a bad stomachache, and Elena let me stay home from school. She moved around the kitchen, slowly pulling out flour and sugar and her grandmother's old recipe box. She taught me how to cream butter and sugar together and showed me the exact way to roll the dough so the cookies would be perfect. She kept saying these recipes needed to be passed down and made me write everything in my notebook. We spent all morning baking, and she smiled more than I'd seen in weeks, even though she had to sit down every few minutes. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and I answered it because her hands were covered in flour. It was Rachel saying Elena needed to come in immediately about some concerning test results from her last appointment. Marcus walked in from the garage and took the phone from me and told Rachel that Elena was fine and they'd come to the regular appointment next week. He hung up and deleted the call from the phone history while Elena asked who it was, and he said it was just a telemarketer. The next day at school, I stayed after class and told Mrs. Smith that I was worried about my foster mom. She She asked me gentle questions about what was happening at home, but I was scared to say too much because Marcus always said foster kids who cause trouble get sent away. She wrote her personal phone number on a piece of paper and put it in my backpack and told me to call her anytime, day or night, if I needed help. That weekend, I watched Marcus drill new locks into all the bedroom doors, but these ones locked from the outside instead of inside. He said it was for safety, but I saw him test the lock on their bedroom door while Elena was napping, and the key went straight onto his keychain. 2 weeks later, Elena was making lunch when she grabbed her stomach and cried out that something was wrong. I called 911 on the kitchen phone while Marcus stood there saying she was being dramatic and trying to get attention. The paramedics arrived and checked her and said she was having contractions at only 34 weeks and needed to go to the hospital immediately. Marcus refused to ride in the ambulance and told me we'd visit tomorrow if she was actually admitted and not just making a fuss over nothing. At the hospital the next day, I sat in the waiting room while Marcus talked to the doctor, and I could hear the nurses at their station talking about Elena's condition. One nurse was reading from a chart saying the words dehydration and malnutrition and extreme stress, and another nurse said Rachel had ordered a social services consultation. I memorized every word to tell someone, but who would believe a 7-year-old kid over a grown-up? Grace showed up at the hospital while Marcus was at work, even though he'd told everyone not to visit because Elena needed rest. She brought me with her, and we went into Elena's room where she was hooked up to machines that beeped every few seconds. Grace sat on the bed and held Elena's hand and said she and James could see what was happening and they were going to help her. Elena started sobbing so hard the machine started beeping faster, and a nurse came in to check on her. The nurse adjusted Elena's IV and told Grace visiting hours were almost over when I heard Marcus's voice booming down the hallway. My whole body went cold because I knew that angry tone meant trouble for everyone. Grace squeezed Elena's hand tighter while I slipped into the bathroom and locked the door behind me. Through the door, I could hear Marcus yelling at Grace about how she had no right being there. His footsteps got closer, and I pressed myself against the wall, trying not to breathe too loud. Grace's voice stayed calm, but I could hear her phone making that little beep it does when you start recording. Marcus kept saying stuff about his family and how Grace needed to stay away from them. The bathroom had this tiny window, and I could see the parking lot where his truck was parked crooked across 2 spaces. After what felt like forever, the voices moved away, and Grace knocked on the bathroom door to tell me it was safe. 2 days later, they let Elena come home, but Marcus made her sign all these papers at the hospital desk. Linda Torres from Child Services showed up at my school that same week trying to talk to me. The principal called me to the office, but then said Marcus had called, and I couldn't talk to anyone without him there. I started sneaking stuff into my backpack like granola bars and water bottles for Elena. At home, I'd grab her prenatal vitamins from the trash when Marcus threw them away. When he watched TV, I'd slip the supplies under her pillow with little notes saying they were for her and the baby. She found them one night, and tears rolled down her face while she held my hand without saying anything. During computer time at school, I searched for Elena's family on Facebook using the library computers. Her mom's profile had all these posts asking Marcus to let their daughter call home. The posts said they missed her and just wanted to know she was okay. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to Mrs. Johnson's email that she'd given our class for homework. That Friday, Marcus announced we were going camping, just him and me for the whole weekend. Elena tried to stand up from the couch to ask if she could come too. Marcus looked at her belly and said the walking would be too much for her condition. While he loaded the truck, I saw Elena slip something into my backpack when he wasn't looking. The campsite was 3 hours away, and Marcus kept talking about how nice it would be with just us guys. We set up the tent near this creek and cooked hot dogs over the fire like everything was normal. That night, after Marcus started snoring, I used my flashlight to read Elena's note from my backpack. The paper was folded really small, and her handwriting was shaky, but I could read it. She wrote about papers in the drawer and how the baby wasn't his and to be brave. At the bottom, she wrote that she loved me like her own son, and my chest felt tight. I realized she thought something bad might happen to her while we were gone. The next morning, Marcus made pancakes on the camping stove and started asking weird questions. He wanted to know if I'd be okay living with just him if something happened to Elena. He said some kids only have dads and they turn out fine and even better sometimes. I pretended to be excited about the idea while my brain tried to figure out how to protect Elena. When Marcus went to take a shower at the campground bathroom, I grabbed his phone from the tent. I texted Mrs. Williams from his phone saying Elena needed help and to check on her. Marcus came back before I could delete the message, but he didn't check his phone right away. We packed up Sunday morning and drove home with him singing along to the radio like nothing was wrong. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the front door was open, which made my stomach drop. Marcus stepped over his own doorstep, and I ran inside to find Elena on the bathroom floor. She was holding her belly, and there was water all over the tiles around her. Marcus literally stepped over her to get his keys from the kitchen counter while she moaned in pain. I grabbed the house phone and called 911, screaming our address over and over until they said help was coming. Marcus tried to grab the phone from me, but I ran outside to the front yard still yelling the address. The ambulance came in 8 minutes, but it felt like hours watching Elena on on that bathroom floor. At the hospital, they rushed Elena to the delivery room and she begged them to let me stay with her. Marcus wouldn't go in because he said it wasn't his problem, but the nurses let me hold her hand. The doctor kept saying she was doing great, even though the baby was 5 weeks early. Elena squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't let go even when she screamed. After 2 hours of pushing, the baby finally came out, and the doctor held her up for us to see. The baby had dark skin and curly black hair, and suddenly I understood everything about why Marcus hated Elena. The nurses cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a pink blanket while Elena cried happy tears. Elena named her Sophia and asked if I wanted to hold her first before anyone else. The baby was so tiny and warm, and her little fingers wrapped around my thumb when I touched her hand. Elena whispered that I was Sophia's brother, and I had to always protect her no matter what. The nurse took pictures of the three of us together with Elena's phone to save the moment. I noticed the doctor writing a lot of notes in Elena's chart about her condition and injuries. 2 days went by with Elena getting stronger, and the nurses teaching her how to care for Sophia. Marcus finally showed up at the hospital, but he wouldn't even look at the baby. Marcus, stepping over Elena on the bathroom floor, takes the prize for coldest move ever. Most people step over puddles, not their pregnant wife having a medical emergency. The nurse brought him the birth certificate to sign, and he pushed it away. He told everyone in the room he wasn't the father and wasn't signing anything. The nurse called for Dr. Hoffman, who tried talking to him, but Marcus kept yelling about not being responsible for someone else's kid. Hospital security showed up when Marcus grabbed my arm and tried pulling me toward the exit while Elena was still hooked up to monitors. They blocked the door and told him he couldn't take me anywhere without proper documentation. Linda Torres from Child Services arrived an hour later with a thick folder of papers and 2 other people. She took me to a quiet room where a nice lady with glasses asked me questions while Linda wrote everything down. I showed them all the photos on my phone of the locks Marcus put on doors and Elena's bruises. I played the recordings from the tablet where Marcus called Elena horrible names and threatened her. Linda's face got more and more serious as she looked through everything. The lady with glasses asked if I felt safe going home with Marcus, and I shook my head no. Grace and James showed up that afternoon with a bag of clothes and some of my toys from home. Grace hugged me tight and whispered that they'd been watching everything too and taking pictures at family dinners. James pulled out his phone and showed me photos he'd secretly taken of Elena's black eyes and the bruises on her arms. He'd been documenting everything for months without Marcus knowing. The next morning, Marcus burst into the hospital with a man in a suit who said he was Marcus's lawyer. The lawyer waved papers around saying Marcus had legal guardianship and I had to leave with them immediately. Linda stood between them and me and said there was an active investigation into abuse and neglect. Marcus's face turned red and he started threatening to sue the hospital, Child Services, and everyone else in the room. The lawyer kept repeating that Elena had signed the papers giving Marcus full custody rights. Security had to escort them out when Marcus started pushing chairs and yelling. That night, Linda drove me to a house across town where an older couple was waiting on the porch. They were my emergency foster parents and seemed nice but confused about the whole situation. The woman showed me to a small bedroom with dinosaur sheets and said I could call them Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I couldn't sleep at all, thinking about Elena and Sophia alone in the hospital without me there to help. Around midnight, I called Mrs. Brown from the phone in the kitchen, and she promised she'd visit Elena first thing in the morning. Mrs. Davis from down the street picked me up early and drove me back to the hospital before the custody hearing. Elena was sitting up in bed feeding Sophia, and she looked so tired but determined when she saw me. She reached out her free hand and pulled me close. "I'm going to fight for you," she said quietly. "For both of you. I'm done being afraid." We had to leave for family court an hour later, where Marcus's lawyer stood up and argued I should go home immediately. He kept talking about the signed papers and how Marcus had been my guardian for years without any problems. Linda presented a stack of evidence, including the photos, recordings, and statements from neighbors about the abuse. The judge looked through everything slowly, while Marcus sat there glaring at Elena. After what felt like forever, the judge said I would stay in temporary foster care while they investigated everything properly. Marcus slammed his fist on the table and stormed out of the courtroom with his lawyer following behind. That afternoon, a different man came to Elena's hospital room and introduced himself as David Park, her new attorney. Grace and James were paying for him, and he seemed really smart and organized. He sat down with Elena and went through all the guardianship papers page by page. "These were signed under duress," he explained. "We can fight this." He took photos of all Elena's injuries and wrote down everything she told him about the abuse. The Johnsons brought me to visit Elena and Sophia every single day after that. I learned how to hold Sophia's bottle just right and would sing the songs Elena taught me when Sophia cried. The nurses all smiled and said I was such a good big brother to her. One nurse named Patricia slipped me a piece of paper with her phone number and whispered to call if I ever needed anything. 3 days later, I was in Elena's room when an older woman rushed in crying. Elena gasped, and they hugged for so long while both sobbing. It was Elena's mom who'd flown in from California after Mrs. Miller had tracked her down and called her. Elena's mom pulled out her phone and showed Linda dozens of text messages from Marcus threatening her if she ever never contacted Elena. She had voicemails too, where Marcus said he'd hurt Elena if her mom tried visiting or calling. Elena hadn't known her mom had been trying to reach her for months because Marcus had been deleting all her messages and blocking her calls. A week later, Rachel sat in a conference room at the lawyer's office with stacks of medical records spread across the table. She pointed to Elena's weight chart, showing she'd lost 15 pounds during her pregnancy instead of gaining weight. The blood pressure readings got worse with each visit, and Elena had started showing signs of severe anxiety that Rachel had never seen before. Rachel pulled out photos she'd taken of bruises on Elena's arms during appointments and showed how Elena would flinch whenever anyone moved too fast near her. The lawyer recorded everything, while Rachel explained how Elena would cry through entire appointments and beg her not to call Marcus about anything. That same afternoon, Linda took me to meet with a child psychologist at a building downtown with toys everywhere. The therapist had me play with action figures while asking questions about home, and I showed her how Dad would push Mom away when she tried to hug him. I built a house with blocks, then knocked down the Mom figure's room, saying that's what Dad did with Mom's stuff. The therapist wrote notes as I acted out dinner time with the Dad figure sitting far away from everyone else and the Mom figure crying in the corner. I told her about the time Mom fell down the stairs and Dad stepped over her to get to the kitchen. Meanwhile, Marcus had driven to our house with a moving truck while Elena was still recovering in the hospital. The neighbors saw him throwing Elena's clothes into garbage bags and called the police, but Marcus showed them the deed with only his name on it. James and Grace got there just as Marcus was dragging Elena's grandmother's rocking chair to the curb, along with all the baby furniture they'd bought together. Grace grabbed photo albums and Tyler's school projects from the trash, while James loaded what he could save into his truck. Marcus had already changed all the locks and removed Elena's name from the mailbox by the time they left, with 2 trucks full of her belongings. 3 days later, Elena's mom wheeled her out of the hospital with baby Sophia wrapped in a hospital blanket, since Marcus had thrown away all the baby clothes. They took a taxi to the hotel where Elena's mom had been staying, and Elena collapsed on the bed still wearing the same clothes from the hospital. The hotel manager brought up a portable crib someone had left behind, while Elena's mom went to buy formula since Marcus had canceled the credit cards. Elena tried calling about her car, but discovered Marcus had already reported it stolen and had it towed from the hospital parking lot. Her mom showed her the divorce papers that had been served at the hospital, claiming Elena was an unfit mother who had cheated and abandoned her foster child. The papers demanded full custody of me and stated Elena owed Marcus money for emotional damage and fraudulent marriage. Elena could barely hold Sophia while reading about how Marcus described her as mentally unstable and dangerous to children. 2 weeks passed before I figured out which hotel Elena was staying at by listening to Linda's phone calls. I waited until the foster family was asleep, then climbed out the bedroom window and walked 6 blocks to the bus stop. The bus driver almost didn't let me on until I showed him the emergency $20 bill Linda had given me for situations like this. I knocked on Elena's hotel room door, and she answered holding Sophia with dark circles under her eyes. We spent the whole afternoon on the hotel bed with Elena's mom making sandwiches while I held Sophia and taught her to grab my finger. Elena kept apologizing for everything, but I told her about the paternity test I'd found and how I knew Dad had been planning this. Her mom took pictures of us together, and Elena said this felt like what family was supposed to be. Nobody mentioned that I'd have to go back to foster care in a few hours, or that Marcus was trying to take me away forever. David's law office had papers stacked to the ceiling when Elena and her mom arrived for their appointment the next morning. David had already filed counter motions for divorce with Elena as the victim of domestic abuse and financial control. He submitted custody petitions for both me and Sophia, along with emergency requests for spousal support, since Marcus had left Elena with nothing. The criminal charges included domestic abuse, neglect of a pregnant woman, and theft of Elena's personal property. David showed them how Marcus had hidden money in offshore accounts and had been planning this for months before Sophia was even born. The legal battle was officially starting, and David warned them Marcus would fight dirty using his money and connections. 3 days later, the school secretary found me in the library when she said someone was here to see me. Marcus stood in the hallway despite the restraining order that said he couldn't come within 500 feet of me. He grabbed my shoulders and said Elena didn't want me anymore now that she had her real baby. Marcus showing up at school despite that restraining order makes me really curious about what he thinks he's doing right now. Does he actually believe Elena doesn't want Tyler anymore, or is he just saying whatever he thinks will work? He kept saying she chose Sophia over me, and that's why she hadn't fought to keep me. The security guard heard me screaming and pulled Marcus away while he kept yelling that Elena abandoned me. Mrs. Wilson held me in the principal's office while we waited for Linda, and I couldn't stop shaking. The police took Marcus away, but the damage was done because I kept hearing his words about Elena choosing her real baby. 2 weeks after that, James sat in another conference room telling lawyers about his brother's behavior over the years. He brought bank statements showing Marcus had been moving money around since before Elena got pregnant. James described how Marcus had always been controlling, but it got worse when he found out Elena was pregnant with another man's baby. He told them about family dinners where Marcus would humiliate Elena Elena and how he'd seen Marcus push her when he thought nobody was watching. James's voice cracked when he admitted he should have done something sooner, but he'd been afraid of his brother. The lawyer asked if James would testify in court, and James said he'd do whatever it took to help Elena and me. Grace sat beside him, holding his hand, while he explained how Marcus had been planning this whole thing to destroy Elena. The next Monday, Linda drove me to the CPS office for my supervised visit with Marcus in a small room with toys and a two-way mirror. Marcus sat across from me, trying to act like the perfect dad, while the social worker took notes in the corner. He kept saying Elena was going to give me up for adoption now that she had Sophia and didn't need a foster kid anymore. He told me she'd already started the paperwork to get rid of me and find a family who actually wanted me. I remembered the recording device Linda had given me hidden in my pocket and pressed the button while Marcus continued. He said, Elena only kept me around for the foster care checks, and now that she had a real baby, she was done pretending. Marcus didn't notice the red light blinking in my pocket while he tried to convince me Elena never loved me. The social worker finally ended the visit when she saw me crying, but the device had recorded everything Marcus said. Later that week, David called Elena's mom with news that made them both go silent on the phone. His investigator had discovered Marcus never actually filed the adoption papers for me, despite telling everyone the adoption was finalized. All those months when Marcus said I was officially their son were lies, and I'd been in legal limbo the whole time. The foster care payments had been going to Marcus, but he'd never done the paperwork to make me legally theirs. This meant Elena could petition for custody on her own without needing Marcus's permission or involvement. David said this changed everything because Elena could fight for me separately from the divorce proceedings. The next week, David tracked down Sophia's real dad through hospital records and social media searches. He was some guy named Alex who Elena dated for like 3 months after she and Marcus broke up the first time years ago. Alex showed up at David's office wearing work clothes and looking confused about why he was there. David showed him the paternity test results and explained the whole situation with Marcus and the abuse. Alex signed papers giving up any rights to Sophia without even asking to see her. He told David he had his own family now and didn't want any part of this mess. David said that was actually good for us because it meant one less person who could fight for custody. I started seeing a therapist twice a week at this place downtown with toys and art supplies everywhere. The therapist lady asked me to draw my family, and I drew Elena holding Sophia with me standing next to them. I put Marcus in the corner as this dark cloud thing hovering over us. She asked me to draw more pictures, and I always put Elena and Sophia in the middle with bright colors. Marcus was always this shadow or monster thing on the edges. She wrote lots of notes while I drew and played with the toys. 3 weeks later, we had to go to court for a custody hearing about me. Marcus's lawyer stood up and said Elena cheated on Marcus and lied about the baby. He said she committed fraud by letting Marcus think the baby was his. David jumped up with a whole folder of evidence showing Marcus knew about the paternity test 5 months ago. He had copies of Marcus's internet searches about paternity tests from way before Sophia was born. He showed the judge Marcus's credit card records buying the test himself. The judge looked through all the papers and said she wanted a full investigation into everything. She scheduled another hearing for next month and told both lawyers to get all their evidence ready. A month later, David got this call from a forensic accountant he'd hired to look into Marcus's finances. Turns out Elena's grandma had left her money when she died 2 years ago, but Elena never knew about it. Marcus had been taking money from that account the whole time using Elena's information. The accountant found over $50,000 missing with Marcus's name on the withdrawals. David filed criminal charges that same day for theft and fraud. 2 weeks after that, I had to talk to the judge in her office with just a child advocate there. The judge asked me where I wanted to live, and I told her with Elena and Sophia. I showed her all the recordings I'd made on my tablet of Marcus being mean to Elena. I had photos I'd taken of Elena crying and Marcus ignoring her when she needed help. The judge looked at everything and said I was very brave for documenting all this. She said the decision would take time, but she understood what I wanted. That night, Marcus showed up at the hotel where Elena's mom was staying, even though the restraining order said he couldn't come near any of us. He pounded on the door screaming about how I was his son and Elena had no right to take me. Elena's mom called 911 while Elena held Sophia and I hid in the bathroom. I could hear him kicking the door and yelling that he'd kill Elena if she didn't give me back. The police showed up fast with their sirens on, and I watched from the window as they put him in handcuffs. He kept fighting them and screaming my name while they pushed him into the police car. With Marcus in jail waiting for his bail hearing, Elena asked the court for emergency custody of me. The judge granted it right away since Marcus was locked up and couldn't take care of me anyway. Grace helped Elena rent this small apartment, and I moved in with Elena and her mom and Sophia. I helped take care of Sophia every day while Elena was still recovering from everything. I read her stories at night and helped make her bottles the way Elena showed me. I'd sing the songs Elena taught me when Sophia was crying. Elena's mom cooked food from their country that smelled amazing and made the apartment feel like home. 2 weeks later, Marcus's parents paid his bail and got him out of jail. They believed everything he told them about Elena being a cheater who stole their grandson. They filed papers asking for grandparent grandparent rights to see me, even though they'd barely visited before. David said this made everything more complicated, and the legal battle could go on for months now. Then 3 days later, this woman showed up at David's office saying she was my real mom and wanted me back. David did some digging and found out Marcus had contacted her and offered her money to file for custody. She'd abandoned me when I was 2 and hadn't tried to see me in 5 years, but legally, she was still my birth mother, and that gave her rights that Elena didn't have yet. That night, I woke up screaming because I dreamed this lady I'd never seen before was dragging me away from Elena while Sophia cried and cried. Elena rushed into my room and sat on the floor next to my bed, holding my hand until morning. She kept saying we'd figure it out, but her eyes were puffy, and I knew she'd been crying too. The next night, the same dream came back, except this time Marcus was there laughing while the woman pulled me into a car. Elena brought her pillow and blanket and slept on my floor for the rest of the week. Every time I woke up scared, she'd grab my hand and whisper that she'd fight for me no matter what. Linda called David the next morning saying she'd done some digging on my birth mother. She'd found arrest records in 3 different states for drug possession and child abandonment charges from when she left 2 other kids with relatives and never came back. Linda wrote in her report that placement with her would be dangerous, but legally, she still had to do the assessment since parental rights hadn't been terminated yet. 2 weeks later, we had to go to Marcus's criminal trial, and I had to sit in that big chair next to the judge and tell everyone what happened. I told them about the locks on the cabinets and how he wouldn't let Elena eat. I told them about hiding her medicine and making her walk to the hospital alone. I told them about stepping over her when she was on the bathroom floor in labor. Marcus sat at his table staring at me the whole time with this look like he wanted to hurt me. His lawyer kept trying to make it sound like I was confused or making things up, but I just kept telling what I saw. The prosecutor showed pictures of the locks and the empty medicine bottles in the trash that I'd taken with Elena's phone. 3 months went by with court dates and meetings and more court dates. Elena found a job at a daycare where she could bring Sophia, and I'd go there after school instead of going home. We'd play with the little kids and help clean up while Elena worked. Grace and James kept giving Elena money for David's fees, even though she tried to say no. We were building something that felt normal, even with all the legal stuff happening. My birth mother was supposed to come for her first supervised visit at the CPS office, but she never showed up. Marcus's parents, thinking their son is the victim here, shows that denial runs in the family tree like a really stubborn genetic trait. Birth mom wanting money to take back the kid she ditched 5 years ago. Linda waited 2 hours and documented everything. The second visit, she called an hour late saying her car broke down, but Linda checked and she'd been arrested that morning for shoplifting. The third visit, she just didn't come or call at all. Her lawyer sent David a letter saying he was withdrawing from her case because she wouldn't return his calls. Linda started putting together paperwork for abandonment and said this would help our case. Then Marcus's parents hired some guy to follow us around and take pictures. I saw him outside the daycare taking photos of Elena carrying Sophia to the car. He talked to our neighbors, and one of them mentioned seeing me climb out my window that night to go to Elena's apartment. Marcus's lawyer filed papers saying Elena was encouraging me to break rules and run away. Elena's health started getting better once she wasn't stressed all the time. She gained weight back and her skin wasn't so pale anymore. She smiled more and started talking about going back to school online. At night, after Sophia went to sleep, we'd sit at the kitchen table and I'd help her with her homework while she helped me with mine. She was taking classes to finish her degree in early childhood education. Mrs. Moore from school had to go to court as a witness for Elena. She brought this whole folder of papers showing all the times I'd come to her worried about Elena and how my grades were good and I never got in trouble. She told the judge that anyone who said Elena wasn't my real mom didn't understand what real meant. Marcus's parents' lawyer tried to make her look bad, but she just kept showing more evidence of how well I was doing with Elena. Finally, the criminal trial verdict came and Marcus was found guilty of domestic violence and violating the restraining order. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in prison and he had to take anger management classes. His parents stood up and yelled that they'd keep fighting for custody of me. The bailiff had to make them leave. Marcus turned and looked at me one more time before they took him away in handcuffs. 6 months after Elena and I had moved into our apartment, David filed papers to terminate Marcus's parental rights based on his criminal conviction and all the documented abuse. He said it would take months more, but it was the first step toward Elena being able to adopt me legally. Summer ended and I walked into my old school wearing the new backpack Elena bought me. Kids from my old class crowded around asking where I'd been. I told them I lived with my mom and baby sister now. Some parents whispered to each other when they saw Elena at pickup, but I didn't care. 2 weeks later, we got a court summons saying Marcus's parents were suing for grandparent rights. They claimed Elena was keeping me from them on purpose. The hearing was set for October, and Elena spent nights going through papers with David. When the court date came, Grace and James showed up to testify. Grace told the judge how Marcus's parents knew he was hurting Elena, but never said anything. James showed texts where they told him not to interfere in Marcus's marriage. The judge asked Marcus's parents why they never reported the abuse. They couldn't answer. The petition was denied, and Marcus's dad stood up yelling that this wasn't over. Security had to escort sort them out. That night, Sophia started crawling for the first time. She pushed herself up on her hands and knees and moved straight toward me. Elena grabbed her phone and recorded it. Sophia reached my feet and grabbed my sock, pulling herself closer. I helped her sit up, and she smiled so big. We spent the next weekend putting locks on cabinets and covers on outlets. Sophia followed me everywhere, using furniture to pull herself along. 3 weeks later, Linda called with news about my biological mother. She'd agreed to give up her parental rights if Marcus's parents paid off her debts. They sent $30,000 to her creditors, and she signed the papers. Linda filed them with the court the same day. One more barrier gone, Elena said, but then everything went bad again. A CPS investigator showed up at our door saying they'd received a complaint. Marcus had written from prison claiming Elena was neglecting me. The investigator asked to see my room and looked through our fridge. She interviewed me alone for an hour, asking about meals and bedtime and school. Elena had to show bank statements proving she could support us. The investigator checked Sophia's crib and our medicine cabinet. She took pictures of everything. After she left, Elena sat on the couch and cried. I'd never seen her that scared before. We waited 3 weeks for the results. David called saying not only did CPS find no problems, they recommended speeding up the adoption. The investigator wrote that our home was loving and stable. She noted how I called Elena mom without prompting. 8 months of legal fights, and we were closer, but Marcus still had rights. In March, I won an award at school for an essay about family. I wrote that DNA doesn't make someone your parent, love does. Elena and her mom cried when I read it at the assembly. Sophia clapped even though she didn't understand. The principal said it was the best essay a second grader had ever written. Elena framed the certificate and hung it in our living room. 2 days later, she drove to the state prison to see Marcus. She offered to drop the fraud charges if he'd sign away his rights to me. I waited at Grace's house playing video games but thinking about what was happening. Elena came back looking tired. Marcus had called me his property and said he'd never let her have me. She was quiet at dinner, but I could see her thinking. The next morning, she called David about other options. Grace and James filed paperwork to become my official godparents that week. They included letters from teachers and neighbors supporting them. The court approved it in April, giving me backup guardians if anything happened to Elena. Then Marcus's parents tried one last time. They showed up at Elena's work with a cashier's check for $100,000. Elena's co-worker heard them say they'd pay her to give me to them. Elena tore up the check in front of them. They said they'd drain her money in court until she gave up. That night, Elena's mom called from California. She was selling her house to help pay for lawyers. Elena tried to refuse, but her mom had already listed it. The house sold in 2 weeks, and the money went into David's trust account for legal fees. 10 months of court dates and lawyer meetings wore Elena down until her clothes hung loose on her body. I started making her breakfast every morning while she fed Sophia, packed both their lunches, did laundry after school, and cleaned the kitchen after dinner. The dark circles under Elena's eyes got worse each time Marcus's parents filed another motion. They wanted overnight visits, then weekend custody, then full guardianship, claiming Elena was an unfit mother. David filed response after response, each one costing thousands from Elena's mom's house money. I watched Elena count bills at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she moved money between envelopes marked rent, food, and legal fees. She stopped eating dinner most nights, giving her portions to me and Sophia. I started hiding granola bars in her purse and making extra sandwiches for her lunch. The hearing for grandparent rights finally came after 6 months of delays. Marcus's parents brought 3 lawyers and sat there in their expensive clothes while Elena had just David. The judge listened to their arguments about their rights as grandparents, how they deserved access to me. David stood up with a thick folder of evidence. He showed the judge photos of my bruises, the hospital records, the police reports they never filed when I begged them for help. He read my old texts, asking them to make Marcus stop hurting me. The judge's face got harder with each piece of evidence. Marcus's parents tried arguing they didn't know how bad it was. The judge cut them off and said they had failed to protect me from abuse they clearly knew about. She ordered them to pay all of Elena's legal fees and denied their petition for any visitation rights. They stormed out yelling about appeals while their lawyer shook his head. 3 days later, we went to the park for a picnic with Elena's mom, who had flown in from California. Sophia crawled on the blanket grabbing at grass while I helped set out sandwiches. Elena actually smiled for the first time in weeks, lying back on the blanket watching clouds. An older woman walking her dog stopped to comment how cute Sophia was, then looked at me helping Sophia stand. She said we had the same stubborn chin and way of tilting our heads. Elena's mom laughed and agreed we acted like real siblings. For one afternoon, we felt like a normal family eating sandwiches and playing frisbee. David called that evening saying he was ready to file for termination of Marcus's parental rights. He had everything documented, including the criminal conviction, the proven abuse, Marcus refusing visits for 8 months, and 0 financial support. The judge scheduled the final hearing for 6 weeks out. Elena threw up after hanging up the phone from nerves. 2 weeks before the hearing, Marcus got jumped in prison and ended up in the hospital with broken ribs. His parents went to every news station with photos of him bandaged up, saying the stress of losing me caused his attack. They painted Elena as a vindictive woman who stole their grandchild and turned their son into a target. it. The story went viral online with people who didn't know the real story attacking Elena. Our mailbox filled with hate mail calling her a homewrecker and kidnapper. People found her Facebook and left death threats. Someone spray-painted baby thief on our car. Elena started packing suitcases one night, saying we should just disappear and start over somewhere new. The timing of Marcus getting hurt in prison right before the hearing seems awfully convenient for his parents' media campaign. I wonder if they knew this would happen and had their story ready. I unpacked everything while she cried on the bed. I told her we don't run from bullies because that's what she taught me when Marcus scared me. She held me tight and we stayed. Grace and James saw the news coverage and got angry about the lies. They posted all their evidence online, including videos they'd secretly recorded of Marcus hitting me, photos of my injuries, and screenshots of him admitting the abuse in texts. They wrote a long post about watching their nephew get abused and feeling helpless. The story shifted overnight as people saw the truth. 3 women from Marcus's college came forward saying he'd abused them too. One had a restraining order from sophomore year. Another had hospital records from when he broke her wrist. The news stations had to issue corrections. The final termination hearing arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. Marcus appeared on a video screen from prison in his orange jumpsuit. He tried to cry, but no tears came as he talked about being a changed man who deserved another chance. He said he loved me and made mistakes, but wanted to be my father. The judge asked if anyone else wanted to speak. I raised my hand and David helped me stand. My voice shook, but I looked right at the screen and told the judge that Marcus never loved me, just used me to hurt Elena. I said Elena was my real mom because she chose to love me even when it cost her everything. The judge thanked me and said she would review everything and issue her decision within a week. That week felt like a year with Elena unable to eat or sleep. I made her toast she didn't touch, and Sophia seemed to sense the stress, crying more than usual. Linda found me sobbing in my closet one night, scared they would make me leave the only real family I'd ever had. She held me and promised she'd already recommended Elena for permanent custody. Friday afternoon, David called saying the judge made her decision. We drove to the courthouse with Elena's hands shaking so bad she couldn't buckle her seatbelt. The judge read her decision stating Marcus's parental rights were terminated based on severe abuse, criminal conviction, abandonment, and failure to provide support. Elena collapsed into the chair, sobbing with relief, while I jumped into her arms. Even Sophia started laughing and clapping like she understood we were finally safe and officially a family. Linda started the adoption paperwork right there in the courthouse hallway, while Elena was still wiping tears from her face. Over the next few weeks, Linda fast-tracked everything she could, calling in favors from judges and pushing through the home study faster than anyone thought possible. Grace and James wrote reference letters saying how Elena had protected me when nobody else would. Rachel wrote about Elena's strength during pregnancy and how she always put me first. Mrs. Smith from next door wrote about seeing Elena teach me to ride a bike and help with homework every night. The background checks came back clean, and Linda scheduled meetings with adoption specialists who all agreed this was the best outcome. Elena had to fill out hundreds of forms about her income, her apartment, her family history, everything. I helped by organizing all the papers into folders and making sure she ate when she got too focused on the paperwork. One afternoon, Linda called to say we needed to pick my new legal name for the adoption certificate. Elena said I could keep my first name or change everything if I wanted. I thought about it for 3 whole days, writing different combinations on notebook paper. Finally, I told her I wanted to be Tyler James Park Martinez, taking her maiden name Park and adding Martinez from her mother's side, plus James for the uncle who stood up for us in court. Elena cried when I explained I wanted a name that showed who really loved me. 3 months passed with more meetings, more paperwork, and more waiting until finally the adoption day arrived. The courtroom was packed with everyone who had supported us, including Grace, James, Rachel, Linda, Mrs. Smith, and even some nurses from the hospital. The judge read through all the documents and asked Elena if she understood she was taking full legal responsibility for me forever. Elena said yes, so loud that Sophia jumped in her carrier. Then the judge asked me if I wanted Elena to be my legal mother, and I practically shouted yes before she finished the question. The judge smiled and signed the papers, making it official, then let me bang the gavel, which is tradition for adoption cases. Sophia started babbling, and it sounded exactly like she was saying tie-tie, which became her first real word right there in the courtroom. Everyone clapped and took pictures, while Elena held me so tight I could barely breathe. At the adoption party that afternoon at a pizza place, Elena asked me to stand up because I had something to say. I pulled out a letter I'd been writing for weeks and read it to everyone but mostly to her. I told her she chose me when I was broken and fought for me when I had no voice and loved me when my blood family didn't. I said she wasn't my foster mom or adoptive mom anymore, just my mom. Elena was crying so hard she couldn't talk and just pulled me into another hug while everyone else was wiping their eyes too. 6 months after the adoption, we moved to a bigger apartment with 3 bedrooms so Sophia and I could each have our own space. Elena's mom had moved in permanently to help with everything, and we spent a whole weekend painting Sophia's room pink while Elena and I painted mine blue. Elena watched us work together and said our family didn't look traditional, but it was perfect for us. By the time I started middle school, I felt confident and secure in a way I never had before. When kids asked about my dad, I just said matter-of-factly that I didn't have one, but I had the best mom and sister in the world. I was still going to therapy, but only once a month now, instead of every week. The therapist said I was processing everything really well, and that having a stable home made all the difference. One afternoon, a letter arrived with Marcus's prison return address on it. I asked Elena to read it first in case it said something bad, but she looked at the envelope and threw it straight in the trash without opening it. She said he had no power here anymore, and we should go plant a garden instead, something that would actually grow. We spent the rest of the day planting tomatoes and flowers in the little patch of dirt behind our apartment building. A few weeks later, I was playing on the floor with Sophia when she suddenly stood up and took her first real steps, going from Elena to me. I caught her and spun her around while she giggled, and Elena's mom grabbed her phone to record it. Elena whispered, "My babies," while watching us play together, and I realized she meant both of us equally. For a school assignment about resilience, I decided to interview Elena about her own childhood and what made her so strong. I asked her about growing up and her dreams and how she found the courage to fight for us. When I told her she was my hero, she started crying and said I was hers for being brave enough to speak up and save us all. On Sophia's second birthday, I helped her blow out the candles, and that night, it was my turn to tuck her into bed. I sang her the same lullabies Elena had taught me, the ones in Spanish from Elena's mom. Elena stood in the doorway watching with her mother beside her, and when I finished Sophia's song, I walked over to them. "We made it," I said, and the three of us stood there together looking at Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her crib. We were a family forged by choice instead of blood, tested by fire and Marcus's cruelty, but we were stronger for it. Elena pulled me close and kissed the top of my head while her mother wrapped her arms around both of us. Outside the window, the garden we'd planted was starting to bloom with tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. Sophia stirred in her sleep and mumbled "Tai-Tai," which still made me smile every time. This was our family, our home, our future that we'd build together one day at a time. All right, time to wrap up this wild ride. Appreciate you letting me drop my clever bits along the way. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.